is the imminent health of the mother. Should there be a national exception, for example, for rape or incest?
Rigged question. Is an unborn person a person?
No. These should be left up for the states. I believe in the legislative process. Things go further. They legislate, they pass a law, governor signs it, and then it works their way up there. We don't want the FBI adjudicating rapes or any other type of crimes for those aspects anyway. We would want to minimize any type of federal overreach on there. I don't think there is any article, I don't think there's any constitutional duty in there. It's not any of the enumerated powers.
If an unborn person is a person, then they should have a right to life regardless of how they were conceived.
Democrats have been in power since Roe was first enacted, and they never did anything to try to fix it. The Republicans for the last 50, 60 years have ran on overturning it, and now that they have, they kind of don't really know what to do. So we are stuck here because nobody actually tried to solve the problem, and both parties have profited from it.
1 minute for Mr. Womack.
Well, there's no issue that divides America quite like the issue that we're speaking of today. And look, the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, essentially put the issue where the issue belongs, and that's at the feet of the American people and the states of the United States of America, and that's where this whole issue should reside. So, in response to the question about whether there should be a federal legislation or a federal law that provides for the exception for the life of the mother or rape or incest, is not important. What is important is it to be left to the states and let the states decide what is best for the people in those respective states.
Ms. Draper, to you.
I will say, I think bringing it to the states is a long-standing excuse that we've been using since the time of the Civil War, and it doesn't work. I say to this issue, trust women. This is a really complicated issue, and I don't want people without a medical degree making decisions about my body. We have to restore Roe.
It's not your body.
We have to protect IVF. I'm going through IVF myself, and I had a miscarriage back in April, and my doctor thought it was ectopic because they couldn't visualize the fetus, and my hormone levels were all over the place. I was very, very vocal about that story. I asked my doctor, if I present to the emergency room with symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy, will I be okay? Are they going to treat me? She's out of state. Her answer is, I don't know. You should probably make plans to get out of the state. Mr. Womack was asked by a journalist, to comment. He said, no comment, none of my business. And I thank you for that. That was the right thing to say. I just wish that you would legislate with that same sentiment.
Got to go to Mr. Wilson now for another 30 seconds.
Like I just want to reiterate the point that both parties have been in power for, alternating for every couple of years for forever. And this is a problem that just keeps on never solving because that's what they do. They don't actually solve any of the problems. This has been something that I remember going over this when I was in high school. I remember dealing with this 10 years ago. And this is something to where both parties profit by not solving this. This is something where we want to make sure we look outside the parties, the two-party system, to come with a solution.
Another 30 seconds for Mr. Womack.
Well, the first thing I would say is my heart breaks for what Caitlin and her family have gone through in trying to conceive, and a lot of families go through that. And so my heart breaks for you on that matter. I will tell you, as I said in my opening, we have this issue settled at the Supreme Court level. It's at the states where it belongs, and the federal government should not be in the business right now of trying to prescribe what can and what can't happen. Leave it to the states, let the states decide.
Ms. Draper.
Well, I will say I do not profit from the threat of my death. That's not something that I profit from at all. This is a serious issue, and women all over the country are dying. We know their names. We know where they live. I think that pushing it to the states is not the answer when the states cannot be trusted to protect our lives. I want the government out of my bedroom. I want the government out of my exam room. And I want those decisions to be between me, my husband, and my faith leader, period.
Our next question comes from Mr. Brawner, Steve Brawner, and it goes first to Mr. Womack.
The federal budget deficit is projected to be about $2 trillion this year. Many provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act expire at the end of 2025. Should those provisions be extended, And what, if any, spending should be cut?
Boy, that's going to be the question of the year for the Congress, because the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions of it expire. The corporate rates, of course, remain in place because they were made permanent. But I support a full-throated debate on what should or what should not be kept out of the TCJA. Among them, of course, is the fact that the individual rates go higher at the end of the year if there is not a solution. There's an estate tax that's going to be cut in half, and there are other provisions that also expire. Now, in terms of what should we do, first of all, we need to find out what the full cost of what we're trying to do is, extending the rates for the individual rates and the pass-throughs, or the estate tax, or any of the other expiring provisions. Find out that cost. CBO will provide that to us, and then determine whether or not the growth in the economy, the pro-growth policies that we hope to have in play at that time, are sufficient to be able to provide the cover for whatever revenue losses there would be, according to
y'all can post questions
renewing
in here.
the
Of
Tax
course,
Cuts and Jobs
this
Act,
media
or those
won't ask them.
provisions.
Ms. Draper, 1 minute.
You know, this is a very complicated issue also, as are most government matters. And to be honest, I don't know what we should cut. I really don't. But I can tell you, as your congressperson, I will listen to all
Green
sides.
energy.
I think it's important, regardless of
foreign
what
aid.
happens, that we come together in a bipartisan way to make sure that Arkansas comes first,
Stop
to make sure
cutting
that the
funding to
people of
illegals.
Arkansas come before our party.
Mr. Wilson.
I would cut everything, or at the worst case scenario, just prevent the automatic, cost for inflation adjustment that happens throughout all the budget issues. This has been a joke. We're 35 trillion in debt. The unfunded liabilities are anywhere from 200 to 400 trillion. It's absurd, and it's a joke that anybody's actually even talking about this from either of the two parties. They constantly talk it up, and then they'll pass this big omnibus bill that they don't read, or they'll do a continuing resolution under the threat of shutting the government down. And it constantly means they're just going to keep on spending and spending. And the only way they're going to pay for it is inflating the money, which who does that hurt? That hurts poor people. Who does that hurt? That hurts people that save. So if you're any of these people that doesn't own a house, that doesn't own stock, and then they just keep on printing money, you are the one that is hurt the most by this, by the fact that they just can't get their budget in order. And they've proven that they just can't even get it fixed.
Back to Mr. Womack for 30 seconds.
Well, the fact is, we don't have a revenue problem. We're collecting well in excess of $4 trillion a year. 10 years ago, it was probably in the 3 range. So we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. But what nobody really wants to talk about is what the true drivers of the deficit and the debt are. It has very little to do with the discretionary budget that we're fighting over right now. And we have a CR through the 20th of December. It has a lot more to do with what we've promised America in the entitlement arena. And those costs continue to escalate exponentially.
Ms. Draper.
This is an emotional issue. Cutting everything, I enjoy clean water and I enjoy roads. Those are things that I think as Americans we have a right to. We also enjoy healthcare, right? And a lot of people rely on the government for their healthcare. So I know that I wouldn't cut Social Security. I know that I wouldn't cut Medicare or Medicaid. But it's an emotional issue, and I think it's going to take level-headed folks coming together to figure out how we can move forward while trying to lower the deficit.
Again to Mr. Wilson, 30 seconds.
The reality of it is, if and buts were candy and nuts, it'd be Christmas every day. We cannot afford, at the current rate we're going. We're thinking Zimbabwe levels of inflation to where our currency is just worthless. All right. So Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, those are the big drivers of the debt. Sorry. As we're getting older, old people are expensive to take care of health. So we need massive cuts in spending, and we need to enable technology to add deflationary pressure on costs.
George Jarrett has our next question, and it goes first to Mr. Wilson.
We should have put Penzo in.
Illegal immigration has been a problem during the last several years, and in fact, it has been a problem realistically for decades. What specific steps will you take to curb this problem?
The first steps I would take would be to first defund the NGOs. We have too much welfare for everybody that comes over here. We create these incentives where they're coming here, and then they get a cell phone, they get flights somewhere, and then they get housing. So first to stop there. Next, I would end the drug war. the aspect of it, the cartels and all these destabilization that's happening in, Central and South America is a direct correlation to our failed drug policies.
Half true.
And I think that's
It's
where I would
corrupt
start
government
first
officials.
on that. And then also too, we need to do a better job of processing people. We're very, government bureaucracy, it's a big DMV when they're processing people to go through. And right now, everybody, they just come in and they use the, they just claim asylum and then they pretty much can get in. I think we would want to close those loopholes on that end.
Mr. Womack, 1 minute.
Well, the first thing we could do is we could pass H.R. 2. I have voted on H.R. 2 at least 2 or 3 times, but our friends in the Senate won't pick it up. It's the best border bill that I've seen since I've been here. It provides the largest number of border agents on the border. It allows for the finishing of the wall that President Trump started. It again reinstates the Remain in Mexico policy. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we have to do first to stop the bleeding. We have to secure our border. Nothing else. Interior enforcement, the visa programs, all of the other issues dealing with immigration are just not going to happen unless and until we solve for the porous border. And I think it starts with passing H.R. 2.
Ms. Draper, you have 1 minute.
What's happening at the border is absolutely a crisis. Border towns are overwhelmed. There's healthcare infrastructure that is being overwhelmed as well. I think we need to focus on the humanitarian issue as well. Now, Senator Langford out of Oklahoma, a very conservative senator, put forth a bill that had a lot of bipartisan support, but former President Trump called everyone and had them kill the bill so that he continued to run on the issue. And that's a huge issue. H.R. 2, some of the other ones that some of the other Republican members of Congress have supported are not feasible, and they know that. So we need bipartisan support to get this work done, and we cannot forget the humanitarian piece of this issue.
30 seconds for Mr. Wilson.
Again, this is another one of the issues that both parties have been playing hot potato with. We were dealing with this in 2008. We dealt with this in 2016, and we dealt with it through the pandemic. They don't want to actually solve these problems. And when I say they, I don't mean, the actual people there. What I'm saying is there's incentives for them to fundraise. And then when it comes time to do the real votes, they back down.
Mr. Womack, 30 seconds.
Well, I've been to the border several times. I've seen the porous nature of this security apparatus. And if you don't have any kind of ability to keep people out that don't belong here, then what's to stop them? They just come around the gap in the fence, or they cross the Rio Grande. And our policies are such that we encourage more of that same type of behavior. Secure the border, and you begin to solve the problem.
Back to Ms. Draper for 30.
I agree with parts of what Congressman Womack said. I do think that we need to secure the border. I don't think a wall is the way to do it. And I certainly know that Mexico is not going to pay for that wall. So I think that we have to come together on a bipartisan level to make some problem solving and get this issue taken care of.
We go to Ms. Lee now, and a question first to Mr. Womack.
Congressman Womack, it is becoming even harder and harder to rent or buy. We have a housing crisis nationwide. In Arkansas, especially Northwest Arkansas, there's tremendous growth, and people are having a really hard time finding a home or a house to rent. Many local cities are trying to tackle the issue, the housing crisis, at a local level, but what can be done at the federal level?
Well, I'm not sure you want the federal government involved in trying to create. That's not a conservative position to ask the federal government to come in here and solve for a challenge that you happen to have in your local communities. We have to have conversations across the spectrum: government, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and try to figure out how can we build housing. And then maybe if the federal government's going to have a role in it, what are the tax incentives to be able to provide for housing that is more affordable, if you will, than what we classify today as affordable housing? Land costs have gone higher. The cost to be able to develop has gone higher. And in some cases, there are policies in place by local municipalities that drive up the cost of housing that add 12, 15, 20% to the cost of a house that, you know, if we're going to have a serious conversation about it, these municipalities are going to have to figure out how can we do this without encumbering the builder with a lot of additional cost.
1 minute for Ms. Draper.
So a bill was put forth, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. And first of all, I want to say the housing crisis is very real in Northwest Arkansas. People are feeling it. We have nurses and social workers that cannot afford a place to live. We're seeing the the rise in homelessness go through the roof. And so it's absolutely a problem that Congress needs to help to solve. You do represent your local community. That's what our job is. I think that there's a lot of good pieces of legislation in the Infrastructure Act that would help partner with the local communities, investing in the local communities so that we can help to solve the housing crisis.
Mr. Wilson, 1 minute.
This is something that I'm kind of an expert on. I manage a trim and door company in Northwest Arkansas, and I pretty much help people, build houses. I help a lot of builders on this, and the process of building a house is very complicated, and we already have enough of the federal government involvement on it. A lot of the aspects on the regulations affect how many vendors there are. When it comes to national, there's maybe like 3 or 4. There's 2 major ones. When it comes to importing material from around the world, the customs agents and the process in there is really difficult. I mean, I've had shipments sit there for like 3 weeks, and then they'll throw a bill of like $4,000 on you. So we want to get the federal government out of this. We have far too much consolidation going on in the building market, and the low interest rates just fueled massive price inflation that everybody that doesn't have a house is feeling.
To Mr. Womack for 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, Mr. Bronner had asked a minute ago about what do you cut, and there would be a lot of people in Congress, and some on my side of the aisle, that would like to go after housing. Now, I chair the subcommittee on transportation and housing and urban development, so we already have federal government involvement in our housing programs. My bill, the FY25 approach bill that hasn't been signed into law, hopefully will be, does protect the tenants and the project-based housing arrangements that we currently have so that we're not kicking people out on the street. So the federal government already has a role in this. I don't think it should be expanded.
Ms. Draper.
And of course, I disagree. I do think that it's great that the federal government is helping to some extent. But Womack voted against the Infrastructure Act that is going to help bring billions of dollars to Arkansas and to our community so that we can build. And he will vote against these things time and time again because he falls in line with his party and he puts his party over the needs of Arkansans.
Mr. Wilson.
Housing is now one of those problems that I think we're probably going to be dealing with for the next 50 years if we keep going with these same 2 party members, or not party members, the 2 parties in general. It's something to where everybody talks a big game when it talks about building more housing, but the solution really is just let people build. It's illegal to build a lot of type of housing, and we need to make sure that housing is legal to build, and the market will provide.
Steve Bronner has our next question. It goes first to Ms. Draper.
Yeah, get government out of it.
What do you think is the state of our elections today, and what reforms do you think are needed to make them better?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that when an election is called, that we trust what they say. I think election denying is an absolute hit to democracy and something that our troops have fought for since the inception of our nation. So I think it's absolutely critical that we accept the results of our elections. I would like to see reform in the Electoral College. I don't think it's necessary anymore, or at least to the extent that it's being used. I also think, civic engagement, increasing civic engagement, teaching civics is a great way to get people involved and to understand the voting process. I think it's a lot of Republican rhetoric that tons of people that are migrating here are voting illegally. There's just not a lot of evidence to support that.
Mr. Wilson, 1 minute.
I think the big answer is transparency. I think we've seen a lot more transparency in our system in the last 4 years. The government has not only has a duty, but they really should be required to be much more open with how the process is. How does the nuts and bolts happen? And as somebody that goes to city and county meetings to see what's happening under the hood. A lot of this stuff just isn't shared, and then it gets kind of just dropped out of nowhere. The system that we grew up with is not the system that we have now. So we just need more transparency. I think we see a lot of things. There's a lot of people on Twitter now that are, posting, the daily results from the, zero, people that have voted very minimally in the last, 4 elections to the ones that have done now. So as long as we get much more of a open and transparent system as it's going through, I think I think people will be much more happy with the outcomes, whether they win or lose.
1 minute, Mr. Womack.
Well, election integrity is indeed a serious issue facing our country, at least in the minds of a lot of people, because I see the social media comments and the rhetoric out there about, how many people are voting and who's qualified to vote and so on. And we just tried to pass the SAVE Act a multiple number of times to codify that people who are not in this country legally cannot vote in federal elections. And there is a bias toward wanting to more federalize some of these processes. I think you got to be really careful in asking the federal government to intervene in our election process. Quite frankly, I think everybody ought to do it the way Arkansas does it. You don't have any problems in Arkansas, at least none that I'm aware of. There's no talk about some stolen election in the great state of Arkansas. So what Secretary of State Thurston and his team are doing and what our election officials all across the state are doing at each county, I think is a great model for the rest of the country.
30 seconds, Ms. Draper.
Well, I think Secretary Thurston has
silenced
silenced 100,000 women when he disqualified the abortion amendment on the ballot for a technicality that is still, in my opinion, up to, legal debate. So, no, I think that Arkansas participates in a lot of marginalizing practices to folks. It's very hard to get registered to vote here. And then when you do, the DMV loses your voter registration card. That happened to over 60,000 Arkansans this year.
Over to Mr. Wilson.
Like I said, I think the more transparency will solve a lot of the problems. I agree with Congressman Womack that we don't want to federalize the elections anymore. I think that just causes all problems. Back during the founding, what they were worried about were the states would actually, the requirement in there is that states had to hold elections and they had to drag people to vote so they could have quorums. So, but in general, like I said, we just need to make sure that we have open and we're, tracking things as it goes on. So that way nobody gets surprised.
And again to Mr. Womack.
Well, just because you don't get the outcome that you're looking for doesn't necessarily mean that there was some election irregularity. Look, when you're dealing with millions of people who are going to vote, there are going to be some things that fall through the cracks. But in terms of will the sum total of them sway an election one way or the other, I'm at least in Arkansas, I'm not concerned about that. We don't have that kind of a problem. The deadline to register was the day before this recording took place. So now it's up to you 2 weeks before election to go vote early or vote on election day.
Mr. Jarrett has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Womack.
Hurricane Helene destroyed many parts of Georgia, the Carolinas, and even hit Virginia. Hurricane Milton is barreling its way toward Florida even as we speak. Right now, it looks as if FEMA is going to run out of money to handle these disasters. So 2 parts. Should Congress go back into session, because right now you guys are not scheduled to go back into session until November 12th? And secondly, do you guys need to consider more FEMA funding in the future since we're having so many of these monstrous disasters?
Man, I love the question. And you're right. And as this particular debate airs at its regular time on the Arkansas PBS, that hurricane is probably bearing down on Tampa. So my thoughts and prayers and my heart goes out to the people on the Gulf Coast of Florida. Look, the way we fund disasters in our country is flawed. Now, it's a little too early to ask Congress to come back and try to fix what we call the DRF, the Disaster Relief Fund. We've already pumped about $20 billion into it, but we got other disaster aid that we need to be taking care of. And we'll have to eventually. Highway ER, the CDBG disaster relief effort, those are among other pots of money that we have to be able to plow back into these areas to help people who are hurting. But it's a little early for Congress to go back. We haven't seen the full effects of Helene, and we certainly haven't seen the full effects of Milton, but we will soon.
Ms. Draper, 1 minute.
First of all, again, I echo Mr. Womack's sentiments. It's absolutely devastating. These folks are already devastated from Helene, and now Milton is bearing upon them. It's a horrible, horrible disaster. But when we talk about climate change, what we're really talking about is a change in weather patterns, more extreme weather patterns, and that affects farmers. It affects your pocketbook, right? Increasing insurance premiums. And I'd like to point out that Womack voted against funding FEMA. And that's FEMA money that we needed whenever the tornado came and devastated Rogers, killing at least 3 people. This is something that, once again, funding the government can be important, right? We don't want to see these people who are suffering from Helene and now Milton go without the necessary aid. They need that aid, right? I think it's terrible that when our legislators vote against the funding that we need, and then they show up to the disaster zones with their sleeves rolled up, the work is in Congress.
Mr. Wilson, 1 minute.
All right. So the question was about whether or not FEMA is going to run out of money. And this is kind of, as me feeling kind of cynical on this, is that this is kind of a joke. We know they're going to do their wrestling kayfabe and like, oh, we're not going to run out of money. And then suddenly we'll get a bill for like $700 billion. And we don't know how we're going to pay for it because we're $35 trillion in debt. And then somehow it magically gets released. Maybe, some people will do some sad stories and they'll get it passed through. But this is just a show on any of this. People in Arkansas, we shouldn't have to be funding for people that build in hurricane alleys. All right. We've nationalized disasters on this aspect to where we have to pay for it. All right. We had Benton County had plenty of money in their reserves. Bentonville ran out of their reserves through their aspect of it, but the localities should be paying for any of the disasters that come through.
Back to Mr. Womack for 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, pray that you're not in the path of a tornado or a hurricane if Bobby Wilson's in charge, because you got no help coming. Look, there is a responsibility on the part of the federal government to help people in times like this. It doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, we have to have a process by which we can go into that's adequately funded, not necessarily paid for through other cuts, although that would be ideal. But the federal government does have a responsibility for some. But I do agree, in some of the other areas where we can better fortify, I think we probably should do that.
Ms. Draper.
I have nothing more to say.
Okay, our next question. Our next question, I think, goes to Mr. Wilson for rebuttal. I'm sorry.
This is, again, one of those things to where they just like to use crises to spend even more money. So sure, a hurricane, it's awful if you're the one in it. But, we're creating moral hazards and causing more people to live in these places that really shouldn't be, and it's dangerous. And then to fix the whole system, they're basically inflating all of your money away and destroying your entire purchasing power.
And before our next question, we'll take just a moment to remind you that the candidates will have the opportunity to participate in a press conference directly following the debate. And at home, you can scan the QR code that's up on your screen right now. Scan that with your mobile device to watch those press conferences. So get your mobile phones ready. You will see, by the way, you'll see that QR code periodically through the balance of our debate. Ms. Lee has the next question, and it goes first. To Mr. Wilson.
All right, Mr. Wilson, Arkansas is one of the worst states for maternal health care, and it's also ranked third worst when it comes to infant mortality. How do we change that?
So first off, this really isn't a federal issue on any ways, except for the fact that the FDA gets in the way of a lot of life-saving drugs. There's constant places, whether it be Europe, whether it be Japan, whether it be South Korea, that have far much better medical technology, medical testing, and it's far cheaper in the United States because all the regulatory system in here makes it really, really expensive. We have the technology. There's people that want to provide it to the people in need, and it's something we just have to let it happen. And the federal government, we just needs to get out of the way, and then these new technologies that are here can come and save us.
Mr. Womack.
Well, there are grant programs available to help people in these types of crises. If you want to refer to this as a crisis, the fact that we are so low in the state totem pole, if you will, on maternal health. Look, I've supported programs throughout my tenure in Congress in the appropriations bills that support child health and maternal health. I mean, these are all programs, and there's like I say, a block grant program for maternal health that people can take advantage of, and I have supported those. But I think a lot of the issues that we deal with in terms of whether it's infant mortality or maternal health goes all the way back to our ability to provide a better education and better job opportunities for people so that as they progress in life and as they are successful in life, that when they are confronted with a pregnancy, that they have the prenatal care, that they have all of the assets available with which and the health care to be able to manage successfully.
1 minute, Ms. Draper.
I will say I love answering this question as the only woman on the stage and also the only person trying to become a mother in the state of Arkansas. The first answer is investing in women. When the government interferes with medical treatment, women are going to die. And that is one reason that we're seeing the maternal health or death rate so high. But also, I think we're number 4, number 56 in the nation on infant death. It's a huge issue in a state that calls itself the most pro-life state in the union. Now, in 2014, we agreed to expand Medicaid here in Arkansas, and it covered over 200,000 children. Now we have the most pro-life piece of legislation on the table, and Arkansas will not take it. We're one of only 4 states that have not taken this, and it would increase coverage for mothers and infants for a year after birth. This is necessary. The governor calls it redundant. It's not. There are pockets of people that are not protected by the original Medicaid expansion.
30 seconds for Mr. Wilson.
This is just another example of government making everything more expensive by they just keep on adding funds, and it just raises the cost of everything. They add more bureaucracy, things costing over 5, 10, 20, 30% more than it actually should because they're involved. Let's get out of the way. There's a lot of great technological solutions out there, and we need to let them happen.
Mr. Womack.
And I do agree that there are technologically sufficient capabilities out there that can increase one's access to healthcare. One of those, of course, is telemedicine, and I've supported in many respects the ability for people to get healthcare through the current telemedicine services. And by the way, on the veterans front, that capability is expiring under the COVID protocols. And we've introduced legislation that continues to allow veterans to exercise the use of telemedicine for those purposes. I think that's one of the keys to it.
Another 30 seconds from Ms. Draper.
This is my life. I'm trying to have a child. This is my life. And if you're a woman and you're trying to have a baby, you know how scary it is to try to have a child in the state of Arkansas. And that is sad. Arkansas has wonderful people. It is beautiful. We have so much to offer. Equating it to the cost and trying to conflate that with my life is really absurd and frankly insulting. But I would say that we need more OBGYNs, and OBGYNs aren't wanting to move here because our abortion laws are so awful.
Next question, goes from Mr. Bronner anyway. First to Mr. Womack.
The 3rd District is home to the University of Arkansas, which means it's home to the University of Arkansas Athletic Department. Should Congress pass legislation creating a national standard for college athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness?
I've had this conversation with a number of coaches, including guys like Nick Saban. There in Washington when they come up during SEC days when he was still a coach. And as much as I think the NCAA needs Congress to get involved and help them solve for NIL.
This is the guy we should have put in here, Clint Penzo. He would have been a much better person. I hope he runs again against Steve Womack. Steve Womack's a joke. But he's better than these other. Well, I kind of like the libertarian guy, but I just don't think he has much of a chance. Well, they're getting involved would be to get rid of a restriction, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Libertarian answer to this would be that Congress should only get involved to get rid of the regulation.
Said it was a hysterical circus. He said that it made middle schoolers embarrassed, right? It was an insult to middle schoolers because they were acting so childish. And it's not all on the Republicans. I mean, Congress has to come together and figure the issues out.
If it's not all
but I will say, I think
Republicans,
that's
then
why
it
we
must
can't
be
pass the
Democrats'
budget.
faults too.
Mr. Wilson.
Stupid.
It's kind of funny how everybody agrees with me on this one, that when it's
I'm
federal
talking
government should be involved
I'm
in
in the
something
live
like
stream
this,
right
and
now.
then they're all commenting about how they can't pass a budget. Just remember, it takes two to tango, and there are two parties that are in power, and all they do is just spend money.
And our
That's
next
a
question
point.
comes from Mr. Jarrett, and it goes first to Ms. Draper.
Ms. Draper, medical marijuana is legal in the state of Arkansas, but the dispensaries that dispense medical marijuana have a problem. They can't bank because of federal regulations. If you were elected to Congress,
They
would
just
you
use cash. That's not that
try
big
to
of an issue.
put forth an effort to make it give banks the ability to deal with these dispensaries?
I would put forth an effort to listen. I don't know enough about the issue. I think medical marijuana is important. I have so many clients that use medical marijuana that have things like PTSD, which is life-threatening in some cases. My husband right now is going through cancer treatments. It's, it can be a really effective way to get you to eat after chemo when you are not feeling like eating. So I think there's absolutely a place for medical marijuana, and most Americans agree with this, and most people in our district agree with this. So, I don't know what the objection would be, but sure, absolutely, I'll listen. And if I don't see why they shouldn't have, the right to bank.
Mr. Wilson.
I'm going to need a constitutional scholar to explain to me how come we needed an amendment to ban alcohol, but somehow we're able to just, through legislation, ban marijuana. This is silly. And it's a plan. We use it for all these sorts of things, whether it be clothing or even for medicinal purposes. When it comes to the banking issue, this is something to where the federal government is controlling you through banking, all right? You are not allowed to opt out the system. We have better technology out there. You don't have to pay 3 to 6% if the government would let it happen. There's not just one industry. They do the same thing during the Obama administration. It was Operation Choke Point. They did it with gun dealers, whether it be gun accessories. They've done it with prostitution, anything that is gray, the gray market area. They make it impossible, and they really trample on your right to trade with your fellow human.
To Mr. Womack, 1 minute.
George, your question is about safe banking, and there's a safe banking act out there, legislation. I've supported safe banking. And the reason is simple. I'm not a big fan of the marijuana trade, but I realize that the voters in the state of Arkansas agreed that medical marijuana was something that they wanted and enacted it into law. And it is possible now for people to get marijuana or the remnants thereof for purposes of what my colleague to my left has stated. I find it incredible, though, that we would want them to run it on a cash basis, that we would want at the end of a business day, large sums of cash being transported to a bank. That is not a very safe activity. And so I think as long as it's legally prescribed and as long as the entity is approved by the voters, then it should have entitlements to the banking system as everybody else in any of it.
I agree with Congressman Womack.
Mr. Wilson, 30 seconds.
This is, again, one of those things to where they call things a SAFE Act or whatever, and it's safe for the banks and not for the people that have our money. Our money isn't safe because they inflate it to nothing or to infinity. You shouldn't have to pay 3 to 6% for transactions because so that way they can give loans to real estate people at like really low percent. We shouldn't be in the same system, and the same system is what causes them to prevent marijuana dispensaries from having banking.
Another 30 seconds for Mr. Womack.
Yeah, I think the key is we have to be able to separate our feelings about illicit drugs, whether it's marijuana, if it's illegal, or any other illicit drug, and the concept of if it's approved by the voters, can they have access to banking services? I think you got to be able to separate those two. And in our case, Arkansas has approved medical marijuana. I think the people that dispense medical marijuana ought to have access to those banking services.
Thank you, sir. And
set up
with
a
that,
state
the
banking
time has
service
expired
that's
for
free
our
from the
question
federal
and
government,
answer
some kind of
session.
state
Time
credit
now for
union.
closing statements. And as a
Or even Bitcoin.
reminder, the order of
So they
closing
can do it
statements was
electronically.
determined by a drawing prior to the broadcast. Mr. Wilson, your statement.
Not yet. No, I
Thanks
said
for guys
no. I
having
haven't.
me here. As a third party, we
Honestly,
don't get to actually platform our
it's a ring light.
positions very much. So I just want to thank you again for having me.
Makes it look better on TV.
I'm today asking
They're
you
about the
to
closing
throw
the
away your
debate.
votes.
They're about the closing statements on the
As
debate
a
for
third
Congress.
party, as a member of Arkansas, we've seen this dance play, my entire life. Every election is the most important election because we're worried about the other guy getting in charge. And what happens? The debt gets bigger, and all the problems that we were talking about when I was a kid are still here today.
I think
All
Michael
right, so
Packo would
the
have been a better
solution when it comes to
candidate for this.
changing
He's
large
running for treasurer.
organizations
There's also
is
a guy
voice
running
loyalty or
in
exit.
the Arkansas
And I'm a firm
legislature,
believer in exiting
Michael
the two-party
White,
system.
who I
So
think would
please
be a
vote for
great
me,
guy.
Bobby Wilson.
Ms. Draper, you have 1 minute.
I stand before you today in my Walmart suit. I am a social worker. I am a community member. I am an average citizen. And I'm doing this, I'm running for office because I care. I have spent thousands and thousands of hours meeting with clients one-on-one, and I hear their suffering. I hear how hard it is for them to put food on the table. I hear how hard it is when they're members of the LGBTQ plus community and, their state government doesn't want them. I listen to all of this. I am here because I care, and I will
you have the
listen to
same
you.
rights as anybody
I've made the
else.
case today, time and time again, that Steve Womack is a nice guy, right? Just the wrong guy for this job. He puts his party before the needs of Arkansans time and time again. Vote and vote again. He has voted against the Violence Against Women Act multiple times.
Because it's a stupid
I will
law.
ask for your vote today. Please vote for the social worker that cares about you.
Mr. Womack, your statement.
I am running for Congress again because I believe in the American dream, and I want to preserve that American dream for future generations, including my grandkids. And the way we're going to do that is through limited government, lower taxes, fewer regulations, strong national defense, a secure border. Now, I think I'm qualified to do it based on my nearly 14 years of experience already in Washington and the fact that I served 30 years in uniform, serving our country, including one deployment overseas. And I've served as an appropriator since my first days in Congress. And I've climbed that ladder now to a position where I believe I can be effective on the most important things affecting my constituents, and that's infrastructure, transportation, and housing. We have a growth region. We need that support. So I'm asking for your support, your vote in this election so I can continue the great work on behalf of America's next greatest generation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And so concludes our broadcast. We
Waste of time and
thank
tax
our
money.
candidates, our 3 candidates. We thank our 3 panelists for their questions. Now you can watch this and all Arkansas PBS
Yeah, you
debates
paid for
on
this.
demand at
And
the
of course,
Arkansas
Chamber of
PBS
Commerce ran it
YouTube
as well,
channel,
sponsored by the Chamber of
on the
Commerce.
PBS
Some other
video
organizations.
app,
So,
and
there
of
you
course
go,
on
folks.
our websites.
Yeah, waste
And
of
a
time.
reminder, the
These people
candidates
make
have been
politics
invited to
boring.
participate in press conferences, individual press conferences, immediately following this broadcast.
Yeah, whatever. Well, folks, that was it. That was the so-called debate there. Y'all check me out for Just the Right Angle. I'll try to keep up with what goes on in the political scene. Actually, there's some much more important news. I just saw this posted earlier. I had heard about this, but I want to double check and make sure. There is someone else who has announced that he is running for chairman of the Republican Party of Arkansas. And I want to make sure that I get it right in terms of this news story. I saw what it's a little post, and I had to double check on it. Folks, it's most likely that Steve Womack will win re-election. So here's a problem with running as a Democrat. Even if you think some Democrats are great people, here's a yes about the Arkansas Democrat Party. Yesterday was, of course, the day that taxpayer-funded Hamas attacks taxpayer-funded Israel. Problem is, of course, Israel hasn't mounted direct attacks on us, whereas Hamas has. But yeah, they ignored the October 7th attacks the Democrat Party did. But the Republicans, meanwhile, most of them understand that issue. But anyway, I had heard that there was someone running for Republican Party of Arkansas chairman. I'll try to find out, look more into that. Yeah, most of these debates are going to be the same thing. Cookie cutter, made up questions. And of course, most people have already made up their minds by now. It should have been done a month ago. That's another thing. And again, these people need to be, it needs to be an open town hall. A real debate is where the candidates maybe give a little introduction of what they stand for, mostly what they've done. Also, they need to admit who their campaign sponsor is. And then they need to and then just sit back and let the public come by and ask questions. That's really what needs to be done. That's a real debate. And then they also need to have Lincoln Douglas debates, the kind where they have to go through several minutes in order to discuss what it is they're doing, what they stand for, and more importantly, what they've actually done that matters. So anyway, that's pretty much the debate right there. Y'all, again, follow me at Just Our Angle for more videos. Y'all have a great day.